The night had that strange kind of stillness right before something goes wrong. Air heavy, streetlights humming, and the kind of quiet that makes you feel watched. I remember the rumble of motorcycle engines fading as we pulled into the old gas station on the edge of town. It should have been just another quick stop, nothing more. But trouble has a way of finding the people least prepared for it. I'd barely taken off my helmet when I heard a small, broken sound like someone trying not to cry, but failing. Then she appeared. A tiny girl, no older than 7, sprinting barefoot across a lot. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her breaths sharp and panicked, as if the world behind her was on fire. She ran right past the fuel pumps and straight toward us, her small hands trembling as she grabbed my sleeve. "Please," she gasped, voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Please don't let him take me." In that moment, everything around us, the cool night air, the faint smell of gasoline, even the distant passing cars, seemed to freeze. And then I saw him, a shadow moving fast from the darkness, eyes locked on her with a coldness that didn't belong in any decent man. I felt something shift inside Mia, quiet, steady certainty that whatever story this little girl was running from, we were about to become a part of it. Asterisk, the night was quiet in that unsettling way that makes the world feel hollow, as if sound itself had stepped back to watch what was about to unfold. I had just cut the engine and was stretching my stiff shoulders when I heard it, a soft, sharp gasp carried on the wind, too fragile to belong to any grown voice. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me after the long ride. But then I saw her, and everything inside me stilled. She came running across the dim parking lot like a startled animal fleeing a hunter. A little girl, no shoes, no jacket, her hair tangled and wild as if she'd been tearing through bushes or worse. Her tiny feet slapped against the concrete with the desperate rhythm of survival. Even before she reached me, I could feel a fear around her like a cold mist. Her eyes locked onto mine wide, glassy and shaking so hard she could barely keep them open. It wasn't the kind of fear you see in children who get lost at a store. It was deeper, older, the kind learned through pain. She stumbled once, caught herself, and then ran even faster, arms pumping awkwardly at her sides. I stood frozen for a moment, helmet half off, my breath trapped halfway in my throat. Something about her urgency hit me in a way I can't fully explain, like she wasn't just running to me. She was running for her life, and I, somehow, had become the last stop between her and something monstrous. When she reached me, she didn't hesitate or think or even look back. She crashed into my leg with a force that surprised me, her small fingers clutching at the leather of my jacket. Her breaths came out in frantic little bursts, each one shaky enough to break your heart. She pulled herself closer, trying to hide behind me, as if I could shield her from every nightmare she'd ever met. "Please," her voice cracked, not from shouting, but from too many swallowed cries. "Please don't let him take me." The words came out in a desperate rush, tangled with raw terror. She said them like a prayer to someone she hoped might finally listen. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just fear she was giving me, it was trust. Blind, instinctive, fragile trust. The kind a child only gives when every other option has already been taken from them. I knelt slowly, trying not to overwhelm her, my palms open beside me. "It's okay," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if that was true yet. "You're safe. You're with me now." Even as I spoke, I kept my ears tuned to the night behind her, waiting for whatever she had run from to show itself. Up close, I could see faint bruises blooming along her arms, old ones buried under newer ones. Her dress, if you could still call it, that was ripped at the shoulder, dirt smudged across the fabric. She looked like she had been pulled through more misery than any child should ever know. And she was trembling so hard it felt like she might collapse at any second. I let her lean against me, her forehead pressing into my side as she tried to catch her breath. Her tears soaked into my shirt, hot and fast, leaving trails of fear written across my ribs. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I didn't ask questions. I just let her be a scared child, needing someone bigger to stand between her and the darkness. Then, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate ones. Heavy enough to belong to a grown man. The kind of footsteps that don't hurry because they believe they'll get what they want, no matter how long it takes. My back stiffened instinctively, my muscles waking up like coiled wire. The girl heard them too. Her entire body tensed in my arms, her fingers digging into my jacket with a strength fueled by pure terror. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She already knew who those steps belonged to. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the shadow growing at the edge of the station's light. A tall figure stepped forward from the darkness, his shoulders square. His gait confident in that unsettling way men have when they're used to people fearing them. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply approached like he was claiming what he thought belonged to him. The girl let out a tiny whimper, sound so quiet it barely existed. But it hit me harder than a punch to the gut. I shifted my body, placing myself fully between her and the approaching stranger. My hand instinctively rested on her shoulder, steadying her. The man stopped a few yards away, just outside the glow of the overhead lights. I could see the outline of him, broad frame, stiff posture, hands clenched just a bit too tightly at his sides. His breathing was controlled. But there was an underlying tension that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Come here," he said, voice smooth but with an edge I didn't like. It wasn't a request. It was a command disguised as calm. A serpent's whisper. The girl flinched violently. She buried her face deeper into my side, shaking her head in frantic little jerks. That was all I needed. Her reaction told me more truth than any words ever could. I rose slowly, keeping her behind me as I faced the man. The protective instinct in me rusty but still alive kicked on like an engine roaring to life. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But I knew enough. And I knew one thing with absolute clarity. She wasn't going anywhere with that man. She stays here, I said, my voice steady and low. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just... Final dot, the man's jaw twitched. His eyes flickered like someone carefully calculating their next move. He took one small step closer, and the girl whimpered again, holding my hand with a desperation that nearly broke me in half. For a moment, the three of us stood there caught in a silent, trembling triangle of fear, anger, and defiance. The night around us held its breath. Even the hum of the gas station lights seemed to fade, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. I didn't know if he was dangerous. I didn't know how far he'd go. But I knew this: that little girl had chosen me as her shield. And I wasn't about to let her down. Not now. Not ever. The man stepped fully into the light at last, and something in my chest tightened the moment I saw his face. He carried himself with a confidence that didn't come from kindness, more like the smug certainty of someone who'd gotten away with too much for too long. His eyes were the worst of it, empty, cold, the kind of eyes that look through you rather than at you, the kind that don't see people, only possessions. He scanned the scene like a wolf marking what he believed was his territory. When his gaze finally landed on the girl hiding behind me, a thin smile pulled at the edge of his lips. It wasn't warm or relieved. It was possessive, hungry in a way that made my stomach churn. He reached out one hand slightly, palm up, as if expecting her to come crawling back. "There you are," he said, voice smooth enough to fool someone who didn't know better. "You've scared your uncle half to death running off like that." The words sounded well rehearsed, like he'd practiced excuses long before he spoke them. Something about the way he said uncle made my skin crawl. The girl's breath hitched, and she pressed herself tighter against my back. Her grip on my jacket trembled, but she didn't let go. She knew better than I did what that man was capable of. Her silence spoke volumes, fear carved into every breath. Every shiver, every tear clinging to her lashes. I kept my stance steady, but inside, something heavy and angry rose like thunder. "She says she doesn't want to go with you," I said quietly. My voice stayed calm, though I felt sparks of tension crackling under my skin. And I'm not about to hand a terrified child to a stranger with a story that doesn't feel right. The man's fake smile faded just a fraction, revealing the irritation hiding beneath. He took a slow step forward, shoulders stiffening, his expression sharpening like a knife being unsheathed. "She's confused," he said. "You don't know her situation. This is a family matter." The girl shook her head frantically behind me, tiny fingers digging into my elbow. She wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She wasn't misbehaving. She was terrified, and no child reacts like that to someone who loves them. "I'm not seeing a family matter," I replied. "I'm seeing a scared kid who ran barefoot through the dark to get away from you." My eyes didn't leave his. His gaze didn't flinch. He had the kind of stare that tried to dominate a room through force alone. For the first time, a crack formed in his mask. A small one, but enough. His eyes hardened, flattening into something colder. "She lies when she's upset," he muttered. "She does that a lot. You have no idea what she's like." His tone sharpened, revealing a thread of contempt he hadn't meant to show. Children don't bruise themselves. Children don't run screaming to strangers on the side of the road for fun. Children don't beg for protection unless they have good reason. The truth hung between us like a quiet storm. The girl peeked out from behind me, just long enough to meet his eyes before recoiling like she'd touched a hot stove. Her breath grew sharper again, her chest rising too fast, too shallow. That alone told me everything I needed to know about their so-called relationship. I shifted slightly so she was shielded fully again, my body blocking her line of sight. I could almost feel her relief when the man's eyes disappeared behind my shoulder. It broke my heart how small she seemed, how she flinched at shadows. Sounds, even at her own breath, catching. The man must have noticed it too. His jaw tightened and his hands curled into fists before he forced them loose again. He took another step forward, each inch closing the distance with the calculated patience of a predator. "That's enough," he hissed, his tone no longer smooth. "Hand her over. You don't know what you're interfering with." I held my ground, still and unyielding. "Then explain it," I said softly, not moving an inch. "Explain why she's bruised. Why she's crying. Why she ran from you like her life depended on it." For a moment, he couldn't speak. Not because he didn't have lies ready, because he didn't know which ones I'd believe. His mouth opened, then shut again as he tried to measure me up. Tried to figure out whether intimidation or manipulation would work better. He chose the wrong approach. "You bikers think you're tough," he said, stepping closer again, trying to loom over me. "But you don't know when to stay out of other people's business." I felt the girl tremble again, her forehead pressing into my spine. Her fear poured through me like cold water, sharpening my focus. I angled myself more firmly between them, creating a solid barrier she could anchor herself to. "This child," I said slowly, "is not your business anymore. Not tonight." Something in his face flickered rage, disbelief, something darker. His eyes narrowed until only thin slits remained, the mask slipping fully away to reveal the predator underneath. For the first time, I saw him clearly, a man who refused to be defied, who had built his world on power and fear, and he wasn't used to losing control. He pointed a finger at me, slow and deliberate. "You're making a mistake," he said through clenched teeth. A big one. You have no idea what you're getting into. I didn't look away. Maybe not, I replied. But I know what I'm not getting into, and that's letting you walk away with her. The girl made a small noise behind me, something between a sob and a breath. I reached back with my hand, not turning, just offering my fingers. She grabbed them instantly, holding on with the desperate strength of a drowning child clinging to driftwood. That tiny grip made my resolve hit a steel-like clarity. The man watched us with a hatred so pure it chilled the air around us. His expression twisted, like he couldn't believe a stranger had the nerve to stand in his way. He took another step forward, but this time his motion was quicker. Sharper warning. I stepped forward too, matching him inch for inch, my shoulders rising as my stance solidified. For a moment, we stood face to face, locked in a silent confrontation thick enough to choke on. Then my brothers returned. Boots hit the concrete behind me, steady and sure. The hum of leather, denim, and quiet authority filled the space. The man's eyes flickered over my shoulder, light fading from his confidence as he realized he was no longer dealing with just one biker. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply held his gaze, and the deadness in his eyes finally faltered. I heard the rumble before I saw them, a low, steady roar rolling across the lot, like the calm before a storm finally breaking. My brothers came into view, emerging from the shadows of the gas station, engines fading into a steady hum. They didn't rush, didn't shout, but you could feel their presence before they even stepped into the light. A wall of quiet power, each one carrying the weight of countless roads traveled and battles survived. The little girl pressed herself closer, shivering against my side. Her tiny hands clutched at my jacket as if she could anchor herself to the only safety she'd known in hours, maybe days. She peered up at them, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope, like she was trying to figure out if these new strangers were angels or just more danger. One by one, the bikers stopped around us, forming a loose semicircle. No one spoke. No one moved faster than necessary. Their silence was deliberate, heavy, and calm, the kind of silence that carries an unspoken warning. The man we were facing finally seemed to notice, his confidence faltering slightly as he took measure of all of us. I could see it in his eyes, the first flicker of doubt. He had expected a lone obstacle, one hesitant and uncertain. He had not expected a quiet army of strangers whose faces told stories of hardship, survival, and loyalty. He shifted his weight, hands twitching at his sides like a caged animal considering the bars before it. The girl's breathing slowed, just a little, as if she recognized the shift in the air. She didn't relax completely, how could she? But her grip on me loosened just enough for me to sense a flicker of relief. She looked up at me and whispered, almost inaudibly, "There. Helping?" I nodded without speaking, letting her know she was right. The man tried to reclaim the ground with words, stepping forward. "You think you can intimidate me?" he hissed. "You think this little girl needs protection from me?" His voice quivered under the weight of his own frustration. He expected fear, submission, tears. Instead, he was met with composed, immovable resolve. One of the bikers, older than the rest, stepped slightly forward, voice low and steady. "Step back now," he said. There was no anger in his tone, only certainty. A calm that comes from knowing you have nothing to fear when your conscience is clean and your intentions are pure. The man's jaw clenched. The first real sign that he was beginning to understand this confrontation wouldn't go his way. The little girl peeked over my shoulder again, watching the interaction. Her eyes darted between us and him, trying to understand what was happening. She didn't fully understand courage yet, but she felt it, like an invisible shield pressing against the air around us. And she clung to it, tiny fingers threading through mine, grounding herself to something stronger than fear. The man's voice rose, sharper this time, desperate to assert control. "She belongs with me," he shouted. His words were meant to intimidate, but they carried no weight against the quiet certainty of the bikers surrounding him. He stepped closer, but every motion was mirrored by a shift in our stance. A subtle reminder that he had nowhere to push without consequences. One biker stepped even closer, boots scraping lightly against the concrete. "Not tonight," he said, voice like gravel. "And not with you. Back off before this gets ugly." The man's eyes flickered, doubt creeping in. For the first time, the illusion of power he had carried with him began to crack. I glanced down at the girl. She was trembling again, though her eyes shone with a tiny spark of hope. She whispered, "You're not leaving me, right?" I squeezed her hand, letting her feel the steadiness of my grip. "No," I said softly. "Not now, not ever." Even I could feel the weight of the promise. The man lunged forward suddenly, quick and sharp, testing us. The bikers reacted instantly, surrounding him more tightly, a silent wall closing in. He froze mid-step, caught off guard by the precision and timing of their movements. Every instinct told him to retreat. But pride and stubbornness rooted him to the spot. The girl cried out softly, small but piercing, and it was enough to anchor my focus. I placed myself fully in front of her, my body a shield. Her trust in me was absolute, unspoken, and it weighed heavily in the best possible way. I felt the full responsibility of it pressing down, but I didn't flinch. Not for a second. The man's hand twitched toward her again, testing, reaching. One biker's voice cut through the night, calm but lethal. One more step. The pause that followed was thick, electric. Every muscle in the man's body screamed tension. He knew the line had been drawn, and crossing it would be catastrophic. The girl's breathing began to slow. Just a fraction, as she felt the room of protectors tighten around her. She whispered my name, small and fragile, and I knelt slightly so she could see my face. "You're safe," I told her again. And in that moment, it felt like the truth. Not just words, but a promise carved into the night. The man muttered under his breath, something too low to hear, before finally retreating a step. His shadow flickered as he weighed his options. He was losing control of the girl, of the situation, of the story he had built for himself. And the more he tried to mask it, the more evident it became that his power was nothing here. I kept my voice gentle as I whispered to the girl, "We've got you. They're all here for you." She didn't respond verbally, but she leaned closer, pressing her forehead into my chest. Her small arms wrapped around me in a quiet embrace that said more than words ever could. She trusted us fully, a small soul reaching for a safe harbor in the midst of chaos. The man's footsteps faltered, then retreated slightly, realizing he was outnumbered, outmatched, and exposed. The night air, once thick with fear, began to feel a little lighter. Even the hum of the gas station lights seemed less oppressive, less like the world was holding its breath. For the first time, the girl dared to look around, her eyes taking in the bikers, her potential protectors. Their faces were worn, lined with road miles and hardship, yet kind and grounded in a way that spoke of loyalty and heart. She didn't understand the code they lived by yet, but she felt its warmth, and it calmed something deep inside her. I could feel the tension in the lot slowly dissolving, though the danger was far from gone. The man hadn't given up, and neither had we, but for the first time there was a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible shift that told us he was beginning to recognize the wall of protection surrounding this small, frightened girl. And as I held her hand and glanced at my brothers, a quiet understanding passed between us. This wasn't just about confrontation. It was about hope, trust, and the promise of safety in a world that had offered her very little. The girl whispered, once more, almost to herself, I think. I think I'm okay now. And for the first time that night, I believed her. The little girl stayed pressed against me, small and fragile, as if the world outside our circle of bikers had disappeared entirely. Her breaths were short and uneven, like little gasps of someone trying to push back the weight of too much fear. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just let her cling, feeling the trembling of her tiny body through my jacket. Finally, she spoke, barely above a whisper. He said. If I tell anyone, her voice broke, and she pressed her forehead into my chest. I tightened my hand around hers, letting her feel that I wasn't going anywhere. She could tell me in pieces. She could tell me in broken fragments, and I would still understand. It's okay, I said softly. You can tell me whatever you want, however you want. My voice was gentle, steady, a quiet anchor against the storm she had been carrying alone. The tension in the lot didn't leave completely, but for a fleeting moment it shifted into something quieter. More fragile hope. Her tiny shoulders shook as she inhaled, trying to start. He yells a lot, she whispered, voice trembling with each word. And sometimes he hits. Not just my arm, my leg, my face. If I don't listen, her words came in fits and starts, fragmented like shards of glass she was cautiously putting together. I didn't rush her. I didn't need the whole story yet. Each piece was enough to understand the danger she had endured. She looked up briefly, eyes wide and searching mine. I ran before, but he caught me, she admitted, a small quiver in her voice. The words hung in the night air, heavy with fear, yet laced with a tiny thread of bravery. She had survived once, and even if it hadn't lasted, she had survived enough to run again. I felt the weight of her trust pressing against me. She had no reason to believe strangers could keep her safe. Yet she had chosen me, and the presence of my brothers had given her a glimpse of security she hadn't known she could find. I whispered reassurance, letting her know her story wasn't being met with judgment-only understanding and protection. My mommy. She's gone, she said, the words almost inaudible. Her tiny face hid in my chest, wet with tears and the kind of grief no child should bear. My heart ached in a way that was almost physical. Every word she uttered, every broken sentence was a reminder that she had faced more than a child ever should. She paused, shivering, before continuing. He says. He's going to take me if I don't. Do what he says, and I don't want to go. Please, don't let him. Her grip on my hand tightened, desperation mingling with trust. That single plea carried more weight than any adult conversation ever could. I nodded gently, trying to give her strength through my own calm. I won't let him. You're safe now, I promise. My voice was low and steady because the truth of it needed to be louder than the fear surrounding her. I could feel the subtle shift in her breathing, a little slower, a little steadier, as if my words were small beams of light cutting through the darkness. She took a shaky breath, then whispered another fragment. Sometimes he's nice. For a little while. But then her words trailed off, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. The unfinished thought told me more than anything. She had learned to brace herself for the inevitable cruelty, to never trust fully, to always expect the storm to return. I held her tighter, letting her rest against me, knowing words weren't necessary right now. Each sob, each tiny whisper was part of her truth. And I listened with a patience born from years of seeing people carry burdens far heavier than they should. The bikers behind me stood silently, forming a protective wall that allowed her the space to speak freely. I just want to go home, she whispered finally, voice breaking into the kind of sorrow that pierces deep and lingers. Home. A word loaded with longing, loss, and the innocence stolen from her too early. I could feel the weight of that longing, the aching emptiness of a child left to navigate a world that should have been safe. Someday soon. You will, I promised softly, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Not tonight, perhaps, but she would have a home that was real, one built on care, not fear. And she would know safety. If only we could carry her there a step at a time. She whispered more fragments in fits and starts, little pieces of her days. The yelling, the hiding, the bruises that she tried to explain away with stories about falling. Every sentence built a picture in my mind, one of fear, courage, and an instinctive fight for survival. Each detail strengthened my resolve. I would not allow him to take her again. The man at the edge of the lot watched, his posture stiff, his face twisted with frustration. He could sense the bond forming between the child and us, and it angered him. His eyes darted between the girl and my brothers, realizing he was losing control, not through force, but through trust and human compassion. The girl's voice dropped even lower. I thought no one would help me. I thought I was all alone. Her tiny hands pressed against my chest as if trying to anchor herself to reality, to the promise that someone finally could help. And in that moment, I realized how much bravery it had taken for her to run and trust strangers in the dark. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and held her gaze. "You're not alone anymore," I said gently. "Not tonight, not ever." I didn't exaggerate. Tonight, she had all of us, my brothers, me, and the presence of protection that could hold the darkness at bay. She had found a fragile refuge, and we would guard it fiercely. Her whispers slowed, then paused, leaving space for quiet. For the first time, I saw a faint glimmer of relief in her eyes. Not comfort yet, but the spark of hope alight, fragile but resilient. She rested her forehead against my chest, and I could feel the tension in her body soften just enough to let her know she had survived another moment. We stayed that way, silent, letting the world hold its breath around us. Her fragments of truth had painted a picture of danger, pain, and resilience. But they also gave us clarity that no lies or manipulation could erase. Every word she had whispered, every trembling confession guided our next steps as the night deepened. The man's figure retreated slightly into the shadows, unsure of how to assert control against a group united by trust and purpose. The girl, still leaning against me, whispered one final fragment. "Thank you for listening." And it was more than gratitude. It was the first real acknowledgement that someone had chosen to believe her, to protect her, to stand in the face of danger without faltering. I squeezed her hand gently. "Always," I replied, and meant it with every fiber of my being. She was safe tonight, and we would make sure she stayed that way until she could be placed somewhere she could truly belong, in that quiet moment. I glanced at my brothers. The protective circle had held strong, our presence unwavering. And I realized something important. Courage isn't just about confrontation. Sometimes it's about giving someone space to speak their truth, to whisper their fears, and to trust you with fragments of their broken world. The night air was still, but the tension had lessened. The girl's voice had revealed more than fear. It had revealed resilience, hope, and the human instinct to reach for safety when everything else fails. And as I looked down at her small, trembling form, I knew this was just the beginning. We had seen her truth, her fragments of a life marred by fear and cruelty. And now, we had to act. The man had been circling the edge of the lot, shifting his weight like a caged animal, but now his movements became sharper, less measured. His patience was thinning, and you could see it in the way his jaw clenched, in the twitch of his fingers. The calm mask he had worn for so long was cracking, revealing the dangerous edge beneath. He stopped a few feet from us, the shadow of the gas station lights outlining a figure that radiated menace. His eyes, cold and calculating, darted from me to the girl, trying to find a weakness in our formation. Each glance carried the threat of violence, but also the frustration of someone realizing that intimidation alone wasn't enough anymore. The little girl pressed herself closer, trembling against my chest. I could feel her tiny heart hammering, each beat a desperate prayer she didn't yet know how to say aloud. She whispered my name softly, almost a plea, and I held her gaze to ground her. "I'm right here," I said. "I won't let him near you." He took a slow step forward, testing boundaries. His voice cut through the night like a knife. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he hissed, each word laced with venom. "She will come with me. You can't stop me." There was a raw fury beneath the carefully constructed threats a man used to being obeyed and getting what he wanted. I shifted slightly in front of the girl. Arms steady, stance firm. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," I said quietly, letting my calm fill the space between us. "A scared child who needs protection, and a man who thinks he can take what isn't his. That ends tonight." My voice carried no threat, no anger, only quiet authority. He sneered, anger flaring across his face like fire. "You think a bunch of bikers can scare me?" He spat, his chest heaving with frustration. "You're fools if you think you can play hero for a little girl who belongs with me." Each word was sharp, meant to cut, meant to assert control. But we didn't flinch. Not a step. The girl whimpered behind me, pressing her face into my chest as though I could shield her from every terrible possibility. Her small hands gripped the leather of my jacket so tightly it left faint impressions. Each shiver, each sob, deepened my resolve. No man could take her while we were here. He stepped closer, faster this time, and his impatience became dangerous. His movements were erratic, fueled by desperation and anger. I could see the calculation falter in his eyes. He was used to bending others with fear. And now he was confronting something he couldn't control. One of my brothers shifted slightly behind me, eyes cold and steady, ready to move if needed. The man noticed the subtle change and hesitated, his confidence wavering under the silent threat of our presence. He wanted to lash out, to assert dominance, but every instinct told him he was outnumbered. The little girl's voice broke the tension, trembling but defiant. "Please, don't let him. Take me." She clutched my hand with a desperation that pierced the air like a bell. The plea was raw, unfiltered, the kind of cry that carries the weight of every night spent afraid. I leaned down slightly so she could see my eyes. "You won't be alone." "You won't go with him," I said softly but firmly. "We're here. You're safe now." Her grip tightened, and I felt the trembling in her small body begin to ease. Even if only slightly. The man growled, frustration boiling over. "You think you're doing good? You don't know what I can do." His fists clenched at his sides, knuckles white in the dim light. Each word was a threat, but underneath it, you could see the panic he tried so hard to hide. He stepped forward again, testing the barrier, and the air grew tense as if the night itself was holding its breath. The girl flinched but stayed behind me, her small courage growing with the silent strength of the bikers surrounding us. She had chosen us, and now her survival depended on it. I stayed perfectly still, keeping my voice calm. "You've already lost," I said quietly. "She's not yours to take. You're done here." The words carried weight, not just from me, but from the united presence behind me. The man's face twisted, and for the first time, I saw a real uncertainty flicker in his eyes. The girl whispered again, voice barely audible. He won't hurt me now, right?" I felt the tiny tremble in her hand. "Not while we're here," I reassured her, squeezing her hand gently. "I promise. You're safe." Her small sigh of relief was almost inaudible, but it carried through the tension. A small victory in a night full of danger. The man took another step. Hands raised slightly in frustration, trying to regain control. "You don't understand," he shouted. "I'll get her." But the certainty that had fueled him so far was cracking. He was realizing that fear alone could not bend us, could not coerce a child who had already chosen safety over submission. The night air felt heavier, electric with anticipation. The man's impatience made him reckless, his movements sharper, more erratic. But every time he tried to force the issue, my brothers adjusted, shifting their weight, closing off escape routes, silent and ready. The girl could feel it, the calm behind the chaos, the quiet protection that wouldn't waver. Finally, he stopped, glaring at us with a mixture of anger, frustration, and disbelief. His eyes flicked between the girl and me, calculating, wondering how he had lost control in such a short span of time. The tension in his body was palpable, every muscle coiled with the threat of violence. But he had no choice. Our resolve was stronger, and the child's trust had anchored us. The girl's trembling slowed, just a little, as she pressed against my side. Her small voice, still quiet, said "He's not going to get me." I knelt slightly, holding her gaze. "No," I said softly. "Not tonight. Not ever." The weight of the promise hung in the air, heavy but protective, a shield around her fragile courage. For a moment, the man simply glared, breathing harshly, frustration giving way to the first flicker of fear. He realized that his threats were no longer enough, that his patience had run out, and that this little girl had found something he could never take: people who believed in her, who would fight for her without hesitation. The night settled into a tense silence. The girl leaned against me, exhausted, but still holding on, still trusting. And I felt the first true sense of calm in hours, knowing we had held the line against someone dangerous. She had survived the immediate threat, and though the night wasn't over, she now had a fragile, guarded hope. The night seemed to hold its breath as he finally stepped closer, the shadows of the gas station stretching unnaturally around him. His anger had shifted into a dangerous impatience, the kind that makes a man reckless. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready to lash out, but for the first time, he knew we weren't backing down. The girl's small hand tightened in mine. Her tiny frame quivered against my side, but her eyes, wide with fear, glimmered with a fragile spark of hope. She had chosen to trust us, and that trust made her braver than she realized. I whispered softly, "It's okay. Just stay behind me. You're safe." He snarled, the sound raw and jagged, a predator frustrated that the prey wasn't cowering. "You think you can protect her? You don't know what I'll do?" His voice carried across the empty lot, bouncing off the walls of the gas pumps and echoing like a warning. But we didn't flinch. The bikers behind me shifted slightly, a silent signal of unwavering unity. Every instinct told me to stand firm, to project calm as the storm of his rage circled us. "We're not afraid," I said quietly, voice steady, eyes locked on his. "You're not taking her. Not tonight." The words carried the weight of promise, not threat, something he could not anticipate and could not break with intimidation. The girl peeked from behind me, tiny fingers clutching my jacket. Her eyes darted between us and him, fear and trust warring across her small face. She whispered, almost to herself, "Please, don't let him hurt me." I tightened my hand around hers, letting her feel the strength beneath my calm. He lunged suddenly, a quick, jerking motion meant to startle and assert control. My body reacted instantly, moving in front of her, blocking the space between them. His hands swung toward me, but my brothers were already closing in around him, forming an unyielding wall. The tension snapped like a drawn bowstring, every second stretching with danger. She gasped, small, frightened sound that cut through the night. I leaned slightly toward her, whispering, "It's okay. Don't be afraid. I've got you." Her breath hitched as she pressed closer, and I felt her small body begin to calm. Anchored by the silent assurance of protection surrounding her, the man froze mid-step. frustration flickering across his face. He had counted on fear to bend us, to make the child compliant. But fear had no power here. He saw the unity, the calm determination in my brothers' faces, and the child clinging to me like a lifeline. His calculated moves faltered, replaced by the raw edge of panic. "You think you can stop me?" he spat, voice sharp with desperation. I won't be denied. His fists clenched at his sides, and his breathing grew ragged. But each attempt at intimidation only solidified our resolve. The circle of bikers, the child pressed safely behind me, and my calm voice became his unbreakable barrier. The girl shivered slightly, but she didn't pull back. She whispered, I trust you." The words were small, fragile, but they hit harder than any threat or act of violence. Trust, it was all she had left, and she gave it to strangers in the darkness. I let her feel that trust through my hand, steady and unyielding. He stepped again, trying to assert himself, but my stance was firm, rooted like an anchor. "She's not yours," I said, voice low but carrying through the tense air. "You've lost this. Leave now before it gets worse." Each word was deliberate, each pause measured, giving him a chance to walk away without further violence. The girl's small voice rose again, trembling but firm. "Please, don't let him take me." She clung tighter, tiny nails pressing into my jacket. That single plea anchored the moment, crystallizing the stakes in a way no adult reasoning could. Her courage, despite her fear, made the confrontation all the more charged. The man's face twisted in rage and disbelief. He lunged forward, testing the barrier once more, and my brothers moved in unison. The sound of boots on concrete, a shifting of weight. The quiet hum of silent readiness at all created a rhythm that said he was no longer in control. Not with us. Not with her. I kept my voice calm, deliberate, grounding the girl and the space around her. "Back away. Now." The words carried more weight than any shout, more force than any threat. They were steady, deliberate, and final. He paused, the first real hesitation since he arrived. Realizing that brute force alone wouldn't bend the situation to his will. The girl exhaled shakily. Tiny body pressed against me, but the spark of hope in her eyes grew slightly. She whispered, "I think I'm okay now." Her words were almost a prayer, fragile but meaningful, and I nodded, letting her feel that her trust had been honored. His fists twitched at his sides, frustration boiling over. His jaw clenched, muscles coiled, but his movements became slower, less certain. He had underestimated the protective force of unity and calm, of people willing to stand without fear for something far bigger than themselves. For a moment, he just stared at us, eyes flicking between the girl and my brothers. Realizing the impossible, he could not intimidate. He could not control. He could not break the trust she had given us. And the anger in his gaze began to shift subtly, replaced by the first glimmer of uncertainty. I kept my posture calm, voice steady. "You can leave," I said quietly. "You're done here? She's safe." The weight of the promise resonated in the night, and even the air around us seemed to shift, tension easing slightly. Though danger still lingered, the girl pressed closer to me, whispering again, "Thank you for staying." Her tiny words carried so much gratitude, relief, and the fragile recognition that someone was willing to stand with her against fear. I let her feel that through my hand and my calm stance, letting the moment of connection reinforce her courage. The man finally stepped back. Frustration and disbelief etched across his face. He had lost his control, his patience, and his power to fear. The circle of bikers, the quiet confidence in my voice, and the trust of the girl had become an impenetrable barrier. The night air softened around us, and the girl's breathing steadied just enough for her to peek up at me. I whispered, "You're safe. We've got you." The relief in her eyes, however small, was enough to carry the weight of the night for both of us. And as the man finally retreated into the shadows, I realized that this confrontation, though tense and dangerous, had been won not through anger or force, but through presence, calm, and trust. The girl had faced fear with small fragments of courage, and together we had met it with unwavering protection. The man's retreat left the lot eerily quiet, the tension still lingering like a stubborn shadow. The girl's small body remained pressed against me, trembling slightly, but no longer racked with the sharp panic from before. Her breathing, though uneven, had begun to slow, a small sign that she was beginning to trust that the danger had passed. I lowered myself so our eyes were level. "You're safe," I whispered, letting the words carry more weight than any gesture could. She nodded, a fragile motion, and pressed her forehead to my chest. I could feel the tiny tremors of her body settle, as if my steady presence was a lifeline tethering her to the world of safety she had been deprived of for so long. The night air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of asphalt, motor oil, and the faint tang of rain that had fallen hours before. I wrapped my jacket around her shoulders, feeling the thin tremor of her small frame beneath my arm. It was a small comfort, but in that moment it meant everything. She whispered softly, hesitant, He's not going to come back." Her voice was fragile, almost cracking under the weight of residual fear. I shook my head gently. "Not tonight. You're safe now. We're here, and we won't let him hurt you again." The words seemed to anchor her, and I felt the first real sense of relief seep into her posture. Her hands trembled as she spoke again, barely audible. I was scared. So scared." Her confession wasn't dramatic, but it carried the weight of every moment she had lived in fear. I held her tighter, letting her know that it was okay to feel that fear, but also that she no longer had to face it alone. She hesitated, then whispered fragments of her story, small pieces she had never dared to voice aloud before. "He told me I couldn't tell anyone, or he'd hurt me worse. I thought no one would come." Her words hung in the cold air, carrying the raw weight of vulnerability. It was more than a child's fear, it was a silent plea for someone to truly see her. I brushed a strand of hair from her tear-streaked face and offered a gentle, grounding smile. "I saw you. I'm here. You're not alone anymore." My voice, calm and unwavering, seemed to give her courage, if only in small, trembling increments. She clung to the tiny flicker of hope, her small fingers threading through mine. The bikers behind us stood in quiet vigilance, a protective circle that made the night feel less threatening. Their presence, silent but unwavering, reinforced the truth I was trying to convey. She was safe, not because of luck, but because there were people willing to stand between her and the danger. She whispered again, voice barely above the wind brushing the empty lot. I didn't think anyone cared. The words were small, but the weight behind them was immense. It struck me the profound loneliness she had endured, the isolation forced upon her by fear and intimidation. And now, even in fragments, she was beginning to understand that someone did care. I pressed my hand to her tiny back, grounding her in the moment. "I care. We all do. That's why you're safe now." She exhaled a shaky breath, and I could feel her body start to relax, if only slightly. The tiny sparks of trust previously buried beneath layers of fear were beginning to surface. She spoke again, fragments spilling out with uneven rhythm, each sentence carrying pieces of her life. "Sometimes he's nice, for a little while, but then he gets angry, and I don't know what to do." Her voice trailed off, a sob threatening to break free. I held her tighter, letting her feel that this was a safe space to cry, to be afraid, and to speak her truth without judgment. Her next confession came in halting fragments. I tried to hide. In closets, under beds. But he always found me. I thought I'd never get away. The small voice, trembling yet brave, painted a picture of the terror she had endured. Each piece of her story deepened my understanding, revealing the layers of trauma that had shaped every small movement, every frightened glance, every whispered plea. The cold night air carried the faint sound of distant traffic, almost like a heartbeat echoing in the darkness. I wrapped my jacket more tightly around her and whispered again, "You're not hiding anymore. You don't have to run. You're safe with us." Her small nod was almost imperceptible, but it carried the first true recognition that she had found refuge. She paused, shivering slightly, before continuing with quiet fragments of hope and fear interwoven. I thought I was alone. I didn't know anyone would help, but you're here." The sincerity in her tiny voice was piercing, the kind of vulnerable truth that leaves a mark on everyone who hears it. I held her gaze, letting her know that her words mattered. For a moment, silence settled between us. The girl's small body trembled, but the tension was no longer raw panic, was the lingering echo of fear slowly being replaced by fragile hope. I could feel her heartbeat, uneven but steadying, syncing subtly with the quiet rhythm of our presence. She whispered, almost to herself, "I want to be safe, really safe." Her words were simple, yet heavy with the desire every child should feel naturally, not something she had to plead for. I nodded gently, squeezing her hand and pressing her forehead lightly to mine. "You will be. I promise. We'll make sure of it." Her breathing slowed further, small sobs fading into soft exhalations of relief. The fragments of her truth had unraveled the darkness she had carried alone. And in their place, we were beginning to build a fragile sense of safety. Each whispered confession, each trembling detail, strengthened our resolve to protect her completely. The man had disappeared into the night, but his shadow lingered in her memory. I could feel the fear still embedded in her small body, but now it was tempered by trust, courage, and the assurance that she was no longer facing the world alone. Every fragment she shared became a thread of connection, anchoring her to the people who would keep her safe. The night stretched on, cold and still, but the little girl leaned more fully against me. She whispered a final fragment for the moment, barely audible. "Thank you for not letting him take me." The words carried a weight that belied her small frame, and I held her close, letting the quiet warmth of our presence fill the space that fear had once occupied. And as I held her, listening to the soft exhalations of relief, I realized that the night, for all its danger, had become a turning point. Her truth had begun to unravel the grip of fear, and in the cold night air, a fragile thread of hope had taken root. The night air had grown colder, carrying a quiet tension as we huddled together near the edge of the lot. The girl clung to me, tiny fingers gripping my jacket like a lifeline. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation, and I could feel the pulse of her heartbeat, fast and uneven, against my side. I glanced at my brothers, their faces serious but calm, and we exchanged a silent understanding. It was time to move. The danger wasn't Ganit had only retreated, but together, we could create a path to safety. Every step had to be deliberate, every movement calculated. I knelt slightly to meet the girl's gaze. "We're going to leave now," I whispered, keeping my voice steady. "You don't have to be afraid. We'll get you somewhere safe." Her trembling eased just a fraction as she nodded. Tiny chin pressed against my chest. The man's shadow lingered in the distance, a constant reminder that we couldn't underestimate him. I could sense his frustration, his impatience simmering somewhere beyond the lot. Each cautious step we planned had to anticipate him while ensuring the girl never felt the weight of danger pressing closer. We moved quietly, the bikers forming a protective barrier around us. The engines hummed low in the background, almost like a heartbeat synchronizing with our cautious rhythm. The girl whispered, I'm scared, and I tightened my grip on her hand. It's okay to be scared, I said softly. But you're not alone anymore. We've got you. Every step we took required careful coordination. The night was dark, but the dim glow of streetlights gave just enough visibility to move without stumbling. The girl pressed close, her trust in me anchoring her, and I felt the responsibility of that trust pressing down with every careful movement. She whispered fragments of her story again, tiny pieces revealing how often she had run before. How often she had prayed someone would notice. Each whisper strengthened my resolve, reminding me why we couldn't falter. Why every moment of planning and caution mattered. The bikers flanked us like shadows, silent and protective, ensuring that no one could approach without being noticed. The night seemed to stretch and bend around us. Every sound magnified, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of the highway. Each small noise was a reminder that danger could be closer than it appeared. I glanced down at the girl. Her eyes were filled with questions, unspoken and fearful. Are we really safe? She asked quietly. I knelt slightly to meet her gaze. We're going to be safe, I assured her, voice calm and steady. Step by step, we'll get there together. You've survived this far, and you're stronger than you think. She took a deep breath, clinging tighter to my jacket. Her small voice trembled, but there was a hint of determination now. I want to go home, she whispered. I nodded gently. And we'll get you there. But first, we have to be smart. We have to move carefully so nothing can catch us off guard. The man's presence felt closer now, an unseen weight pressing against the night. He was somewhere out there, watching, waiting, and his impatience made him reckless. We had to anticipate him to plan not just our escape, but the path of protection around the girl's fragile body and spirit. I motioned to my brothers. Subtle gestures only they would notice. We had devised a plan in silence, a coordinated path that would keep the girl shielded while moving toward a safer area. Every step, every pause, was measured, designed to keep her unaware of the full extent of danger around us. The girl whispered, "Will he?" "Follow us." Her small voice carried the tremor of fear, but also a trust that I would provide the answer. I nodded gently. "He might," I said softly. "But we're prepared. You won't even know he's there. We'll make sure nothing reaches you." We moved forward, careful and deliberate. The sound of engines from the bikers created a low, steady hum that masked our movements and gave an almost protective rhythm to our progress. Each step was a mix of courage and precision, and the girl followed closely, anchored to the promise of safety, her tiny fingers twined with mine, drawing strength from the unspoken bond between us. I whispered encouragement softly. "You're doing great. Just a little further, and we'll be safe." Her eyes flicked up at me, small but trusting, and I could see the tiniest spark of hope growing in her gaze. The path ahead was uneven, littered with small obstacles, discarded debris, puddles from a recent rain, uneven pavement, but we navigated carefully, shielding her from every possible hazard. Every movement was deliberate, every glance anticipating the slightest threat. The night air was cold against our faces, biting but sharpening awareness. The girl shivered, and I wrapped my jacket more snugly around her. "Almost there," I whispered. "You're so close now." Her breath hitched in a mix of relief and lingering fear. But I felt her strength growing with each step. The man's potential presence hung over us. An invisible pressure, but our confidence. Our coordinated movements made him irrelevant for the moment. We moved as a unit, protective and unwavering, and the girl began to sense the strength surrounding her. At one point, she whispered again, voice trembling but more assured, I think I can do this. I smiled gently, feeling her courage blossom despite the fear. Yes, you can. We're right here with you. You're stronger than you realize. The bikers flanked us closer now, engines idling in low hums, a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. The girl clung to me, and I could feel the steady pulse of her small body matching the rhythm, a subtle sign that her trust and courage were taking root, step by step. We moved through the darkness, careful not to draw attention. Every sound, every shadow became part of our awareness, guiding our actions. The girl whispered fragments of fear and hope, her voice small but growing steadier with each cautious advance. Finally, the first signs of safety appeared, faint lights from a distant street, the outline of buildings that promised refuge. Her small face lifted, eyes shining with cautious optimism. "Are we almost there?" she asked softly. I nodded, feeling a wave of relief, knowing that the most dangerous moments were behind us. Though the journey wasn't complete, her tiny hand squeezed mine tightly. "Thank you for not leaving me." I held her gaze, letting her feel the weight of my commitment. "I won't ever leave you," I said firmly. "Step by step, we'll get you somewhere safe, and no one will hurt you again." The cold night air carried a quiet stillness as we moved, every step deliberate, every breath measured. The girl's whispers grew less frequent, but the courage in them was becoming evident. She had faced danger and fear before, but now, guided by our presence and protection, she was learning that safety was possible. The night had grown heavier, the air tense with anticipation, every shadow seeming to hide a potential threat. The man, relentless and desperate, had not vanished entirely. Somewhere beyond the streetlights, his eyes followed, calculating, searching for the slightest crack in our vigilance. The little girl stayed close, her small hand entwined in mine, each squeeze a silent reminder that I had to be unbreakable for her. Her eyes flicked nervously to the shadows, and I whispered softly, "I'm right here. Nothing will touch you. Not tonight." The warmth in my voice seemed to anchor her trembling heart. He appeared suddenly, emerging from the darkness with a burst of rage, his movements fueled by desperation. His voice carried across the empty street, jagged and sharp. "Give her back," he shouted, the words more a scream of frustration than control. But he did not understand that the balance of power had shifted. The girl flinched slightly, pressing her face into my chest, but there was no retreat. She had begun to feel the strength that came from being protected, and even in fear, she clung to it. "It's okay," I murmured, tightening my hold. "We're not going anywhere. You won't take her." His first step toward us was aggressive, but my brothers moved instinctively, creating an unyielding wall. The cold night air vibrated with tension as the man realized he could not push past us without consequence. The quiet strength of the group, anchored by purpose, became a shield more powerful than any weapon he could wield. The girl whispered, her voice trembling yet defiant, He can't get me, right?" I lowered myself slightly to meet her gaze. "No, not while we're here. You are safe. We've got you." The small sigh of relief she released was faint but profound. The first breath of safety in a night that had held nothing but fear. He snarled. His patience eroded and stepped closer, trying to force compliance through sheer intimidation. Each movement betrayed his frustration, his growing realization that fear could no longer bend the child's fate. He was a man accustomed to control, and the lack of it infuriated him more than any physical confrontation could. The girl shivered, but she did not step back. Her small body pressed into mine, anchored by trust and protection. I don't want to go with him," she whispered, voice trembling but clear. Her words were more than a plea. They were a declaration of courage that only a child with nothing left to lose could muster. I faced him squarely, calm and deliberate, letting my presence speak louder than any words. She's not yours. You've lost the right to control her. Leave now. My voice, steady and unwavering, carried a weight he could not ignore. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He lunged forward. A desperate attempt to assert dominance, but we were ready. The coordinated movements of my brothers, the silent alignment of purpose, blocked his every attempt. The clash of tension hung in the air like electricity. Sharp and undeniable, but the girl remained shielded. A silent testament to our resolve. She clutched my jacket tightly, whispering fragments of fear and trust. I can't believe this. Someone is protecting me. The words were fragile, yet potent, echoing the truth that had carried us this far. Courage is often quiet, found in the simple act of standing for someone who cannot defend themselves. The man's voice grew hoarse with frustration. You don't understand. She belongs with me. His words were desperate, lacking the controlled menace he had relied on before. The weight of his failures pressed upon him, and his movements became erratic. More dangerous, but less effective. I stayed grounded, every breath deliberate, every motion calculated. She belongs nowhere near you. You have no claim here, I said calmly. Step back and leave. The girl's small hand squeezed mine again, a silent affirmation of the trust that had blossomed despite fear. He hesitated, eyes flicking between the girl and the group surrounding her. The full measure of his impotence in this confrontation began to sink in. Fear had lost its power, and the small girl who had fled moments before was now shielded by a force he could not overcome. The girl whispered once more, voice faint but strong in its simplicity. I trust you. The weight of her words settled heavily, a bond forged in the crucible of fear and courage. Her trust was the anchor that guided us through the final moments of this confrontation. He stepped back slightly, jaw tight, his rage now mingled with disbelief. He realized he could not force the outcome, could not bend the situation to his will. The air around us seemed to relax slightly, the tension still palpable but shifting to our resolution. I bent down slightly to her level, voice soft. You're safe. He can't hurt you now. You're brave, and we'll make sure no harm comes to you. Her small nod, barely perceptible, carried more relief than any gesture could convey. She had survived, and in that survival, she had found her voice and her courage. The man finally retreated, his frustration simmering into a quiet, grudging acknowledgement of defeat. The night seemed to exhale with us, the danger receding, leaving the girl trembling but alive, protected, and slowly learning what it meant to feel safe. She pressed closer, whispering again, "Thank you for standing with me." The words were soft, nearly drowned by the night, yet filled with profound meaning. They carried relief, gratitude, and the fragile beginnings of healing. I held her small hands, letting her feel the warmth and steadiness of reassurance. "Always, you won't be alone again," I said softly. And in that simple promise, the night's terror began to dissolve, replaced by the first true sense of safety she had known in months. The bikers around us relaxed slightly, the unspoken tension giving way to quiet vigilance. Each breath the girl took was a victory, every flicker of her courage a reminder of why we had stood firm, why every step had mattered. The night, though cold and dark, no longer carried the same weight. The final confrontation had passed, and the girl's trust had been earned, fragile but real. Her small sigh of relief, her whispered words of thanks, and the tentative spark of hope in her eyes were proof of the strength found in human connection. And as we guided her forward, step by cautious step, I realized that courage is not just a loud act of defiance, it is quiet, steady, and unwavering, found in the act of standing for someone else, even when fear looms large. The first rays of dawn crept across the horizon, brushing the edges of the city with soft gold. The night's terror had faded into memory, but its echoes still lingered in the girl's small frame. She clung to me as we walked, each step bringing her closer to safety, each breath grounding her in a reality far removed from fear. Her eyes, once wide with panic, now reflected cautious relief. She glanced up at me, lips trembling, and whispered, I never thought anyone would help me." I knelt slightly to meet her gaze, my voice steady but gentle. "You're not alone anymore. You have people who care about you, and we're here to stay." The world around us was quiet, the streets still holding the calm of early morning. The scent of fresh air mixed with asphalt and dew, grounding us in a reality that felt almost surreal after the night's chaos. The girl's small hand held mine tightly, but it no longer trembled uncontrollably. It was anchored by trust and safety. We reached a modest home, lights soft in the early morning glow. It was simple, unassuming, yet it held the promise of protection, stability, and warmth. The girl's eyes widened as she stepped closer, the first real spark of hope reflecting in her gaze. She hesitated, small fingers clutching mine. "Is this really safe?" Her voice carried the vulnerability of someone who had known only danger for far too long. I smiled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Yes, this is your home now, a place where no one can hurt you." Inside, the warmth of the home wrapped around us. Soft carpets, muffled footsteps, and gentle lighting softened the edges of fear that still lingered. The girl's eyes took in the new space, scanning cautiously but already beginning to relax. Recognizing a world where she could breathe without constant vigilance, she whispered again, voice small and hesitant, I can rest here." I nodded gently. "Yes, for the first time in a long time, you can rest without worry. You can sleep, eat, play, live without fear." The relief in her expression was subtle but profound, the tiniest corners of tension loosening in her body. The bikers remained outside for a while, protective and watchful, but never intrusive. Their silent presence was a reminder that safety wasn't just words, it was a commitment, an action, and the girl sensed it instinctively. She exhaled softly, small shoulders beginning to relax. I led her to a small chair by the window, sunlight streaming gently across her face. She sank into it, small frame folding in on itself with fatigue and relief. Her hands still twined with mine, seeking reassurance, but the tremors had slowed. I feel safe," she whispered. A small but powerful declaration. Her small voice carried traces of the night's terror, but also the first seeds of courage that had blossomed through trust. "I never thought I'd feel this way ever again," she murmured. I held her gaze, offering steady warmth. "You deserve it. You're brave, and now you have a place where your bravery can grow without fear." As she explored the room, her movements tentative at first, I watched quietly, letting her set the pace. Each small step touching a soft pillow, peeking at a sunlit corner, even standing tall for a moment was a tiny victory. Every action reminded her that the world could be gentle, that safety was tangible, and that trust could be real. She paused at the window, gazing outside at the awakening street. The faint hum of life, distant cars, birds beginning to stir, was all part of a world that had existed while she had been trapped in fear. Her small lips formed a smile, hesitant but genuine. And I felt the weight of the night's terror begin to lift, replaced by fragile hope. She whispered, barely audible, "Think I can be happy here?" Her voice wavered, but it carried a tentative optimism. I nodded softly, kneeling beside her. "Yes, you can. This is your place now, and nothing will take that away from you." The words hung in the warm light, a promise that carried the weight of everything we had endured together. Time passed slowly, gently, as she began to acclimate to safety. Small movements, touching soft blankets, exploring corners. Even laughing quietly at the sunlight marked the shift from fear to hope. Each tiny action was monumental, a testament to the resilience of a child who had endured far too much. She turned toward me, eyes bright and glimmering with a fragile confidence. I think I can sleep now," she said softly. Her trust, once barely spoken in whispers, was now spoken in the calm rhythm of her voice. I smiled, letting her feel the reassurance through my steady presence. I tucked her gently into a small bed, soft covers enveloping her. Her eyes met mine one last time before she rested, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we had formed and the trust she had placed in me. "Good night," I whispered. "You're safe, always." She exhaled slowly, the last tremors of fear fading as she sank into peaceful rest. Outside, the bikers quietly rode away, the night's shadows retreating with the morning light. The danger had passed, and in its place was protection, safety, and the fragile beginnings of healing. Every heartbeat in the quiet house echoed the promise that she was no longer alone. I lingered for a moment, watching her sleep, small chest rising and falling with calm rhythm. The journey from fear to trust had been long and harrowing, but the girl's courage, even in tiny fragments, had guided us to this safe place. Her resilience, paired with the protection of those who cared, had carved out a space where she could finally breathe. The sun rose higher, warming the room with soft light. For the first time in months, maybe years, she could feel the gentle rhythm of safety. The night's terror had passed, replaced by calm, warmth, and the quiet. Steady presence of people who would never let her face danger alone again. She murmured in her sleep, small words of gratitude and relief, and I felt a deep sense of closure. The ordeal had tested courage, trust, and the resilience of a small, frightened soul. And now she had found a beginning child place to heal, to grow, and to reclaim the childhood that had been stolen from her.